Now that we've discussed the basic sentence structure of American Sign Language, being a subject-verb-object structure, and now that we've looked at some of the other structures of sentences, in particular subject plus descriptor sentences, then we'll now look at some sentences that are a bit more complicated by looking at auxiliaries and modals. Now, for the purposes of understanding ASL grammar, you really don't need to understand the difference between an auxiliary and a modal. An auxiliary is a general category of helping verb that is used to establish the tense, the aspect, or the voice of a particular verb. If you're interested in that, you can look up the linguistics of auxiliaries. And modals are a particular type of auxiliary that talk about necessity or possibility. But for the purposes of this discussion, we'll just focus on helping verbs in general, because in order to understand the syntax, it doesn't matter so much on whether and what type of auxiliary it is. It's important to just understand where it goes in the sentence. So, auxiliaries, or helping verbs, as they were probably called in your middle school grammar class, are common in American Sign Language. You will find lots of examples of auxiliary verbs. Some of them are listed here: can, will, finish, did, the finger-spelled loan word, might, cannot, not, have not, will, as a finger-spelled loan word, as well as or tend. Now, though some of these words do give information about time, they're not primarily used to talk about the time that something happened, but rather to emphasize that time, or to emphasize that something is complete or not complete, that something has happened or something will happen. So be aware that it is not necessary to use an auxiliary verb every time you talk about an event in the past. You might establish that something happened last week and then continue on without ever signing the sign finish, because once you've established that something happened last week, then if you sign that you ate or you slept or you went, it's understood that all happened last week. You would only add one of these auxiliaries if you wanted to emphasize that it finished, it did happen, or that something was accomplished. The same with events in the future. You can establish the time and talk about it without needing to continually sign the sign will. You would only use the sign will if you want to emphasize that it will definitely occur. So remember, think of these auxiliaries as being primarily related to emphasis, not primarily related to time. Now, the basic structure of a sentence with a helping verb or a modal is SMVO. So subject, modal, and then the verb. And again, modal meaning whatever type of auxiliary auxiliary verb that you're going to talk about. It's the modal and then the verb. This is the basic structure. So if you have a sentence like, I will read a book, then you're going to sign that as, and that's okay. I know that you might be thinking, well, that looks like English. And that's okay. Sometimes the structure of ASL simply is going to look very similar to the structure of English. Or if you have the sentence, that the second example I have here, I ate the apple. I already ate the apple. In that case, I finish, eat apple. That looks a lot like the English structure of I have eaten the apple. I have eaten the apple. They look similar. That's okay. Just because they look similar does not mean that this is an incorrect ASL sentence. Now, remember, this is the basic structure, but this is not the structure that you're normally going to see. You might have the book as a topic of the sentence. So you would then have that first sentence. You might have the subject at the end of the sentence as a pronoun as well. So you might have the same with the sentence, I finish, eat apple. You could move that around in lots of different ways. In fact, the modal can also be moved according to a couple of possible transformations. So, first, the modal can be repeated at the end of the sentence. If the modal is repeated at the end of the sentence, it comes usually before the pronoun. The subject is repeated as a pronoun. So, in this sentence, you have, so will is signed at the beginning and at the end. And then the subject, I, is repeated at the beginning and the end. Also notice that in this slideshow I've chosen to be a little bit less formal with the way that I've glossed. It's true that this sign I could be glossed IX dash me, and that would be the same sign. I've just, for the sake of space, tried to condense just a little bit. With the second sentence, you could again see the modal finish, sign before and at the end. So that's very emphatic. The modal can also be dropped and simply moved to the end of the sentence. That would be like this. Or in those cases, remember, you're being very emphatic. It's not simply saying I will read the book or I have eaten the apple. It's something more like I will definitely read the book or I've told you I have eaten the apple. So there's an emphasis when the modal is used that you need to remember because otherwise you could simply sign to mean I ate the apple. No use of tense is included. There's no modal there, but assuming that the tense is understood, that would be a perfectly acceptable way to sign I ate the apple. You would only add these modals if you wanted to be really emphatic that something happened in the past or something happened in the future. Now, when you have the modal moved to the end of the sentence, you may or may not topicalize the rest of the sentence. In the examples I just showed you, I did not topicalize the sentence. So I had the sentence that said I ate the apple without any topic at all. And that's okay. But it's also okay to make topics out of these sentences. So you could have the entire first part of the sentence as a topic and just simply have the affirmative at the end there with the modal and then with the subject if the subject is repeated there at the end. So in this, I have the whole sentence topicalized, the modal and the subject repeated under the affirmative, like this. Similarly, I have the sentence topicalized, the modal, and the subject repeated. Again, notice when you have the topic, you have your eyebrows up. During the affirmative, you would have your head shaking up and down.